For those of you who don't know me, my name is Steven Stottlemyre. I am the Vice President of Human Resources here at Locus Innovation. And the CEO asked me to come in this week and provide a presentation to the board on what we can do to solve our problem or work towards solving our problem of increased turnover. Title of my presentation here is Increasing Organizational Commitment, which I'll get into further as we move through the presentation. So as I mentioned, and as you all know, the problem here at Locus is that we're experiencing an increase in employee turnover, and some signs indicate that it's probably related to an issue with work-life balance. So in order to find some information about how we can approach this problem, I looked at a number of studies that aggregated information from across the academic literature on human resources practices and management and how that affects things like turnover and retention. The study I settled on was by Van Voort, Palway, and Van Veldhoven, where they researched whether there was more empirical support in the research literature for a positive relationship between the implementation of HR practices, well-being, and organizational performance, or a positive relationship between the implementation of HR practices and organizational performance with a negative or no relationship between such practices and employee well-being. So what they're looking for is, or what they looked for, were studies that studied the relationship between those three issues: HR practices, employee well-being, and organizational performance. There weren't very many other studies in the past that have approached this problem, and certainly none that approached it from a broad, cross-disciplinary, systematic viewpoint. So what they did is they looked through refereed literature searching from fields of management, human resources management, organizational behavior, work and organizational psychology, and applied psychology. They looked for studies that had been completed in the last 15 years, well, over a 15-year span between 1997 and 2012. And again, they studied the relationship between these three factors: HR practices, employee well-being, and organizational performance. Organizational performance across all these studies was measured in two different ways: operational organizational operational performance and organizational financial performance. In our case, since we're worried about employee turnover and retention, we're going to be most closely looking at the operational part of these studies. And of course, the employee well-being and how that relates to things like retention and turnover. So what the study found, after reviewing the number of previous studies that they searched for, was that the implementation of systems of multiple HR practices more positively associated with employee well-being than is the implementation of single HR practices. So what that means for us is that as we look at this problem, I think it's important to note that probably the best course of action is to enact systems of HR practices than to enact, one or two recommendations. Just doing something like allowing people to, attend external training or something like that is not going to have the same type of effect as if we implement some sort of training program that tries to reach all employees in the organization. So digging deeper into the Vandevore piece, we find some themes in the literature about the relationship between employee well-being and organizational operations. The first is that employee involvement, whether that's real or perceived in the organization, can have a positive impact on retention and turnover. Increasing feedback and power sharing can also have a positive impact on retention and turnover. And training and employee development seems to have a positive impact on retention and turnover. So, taking these themes, I've put together 3 recommendations, the first of which is to increase employee involvement in the organization. So this can be done a number of ways, and like I said prior, I think that any recommendation should be considered a group of recommendations. So increase employee involvement should include all of these things, not just one of these things. The first I wrote up here is allow projects to be completed by autonomous teams. Having teams that may not have a designated supervisor figure out problems and ultimately solve them for locus is something that can make the employees feel like they're more involved in the organization, that they have a little bit more buy-in in terms of organization success. By the same token, providing quarterly briefings to all employees on organizational successes and challenges and overall organizational strategies is another way to get employees to at least feel like they are close to the central planners in this organization, no matter whether they're a janitor, whether they're a line worker, whether they're middle management, or whether they're an executive. By providing briefings like this, we can get employees to connect what they're doing on a day-to-day basis to the overall organizational strategy. Finally, here I suggest creating an incentive and award program for streamlining organizational practices. This is a HR practice that has worked in other contexts in the public and private sector, where employees are awarded for doing things like reducing the amount of paper that's used in the company or something like that. And perhaps they'll get a bonus or a portion of those savings put back in their paycheck. Again, all 3 of these are meant to increase an employee's perceived personal involvement in running the company or helping to run the company. The second recommendation here is to increase feedback and power sharing with employees. So first I have enable employees to co-draft their own performance measures based on their established work requirements. This helps employees take a little bit of ownership of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and also provides them with the sense that we understand, and we do understand, that they are the experts on their particular daily tasks, and that we are seeking out their expertise and how to use them appropriately and most efficiently on a daily basis. The second one here is to increase the frequency of performance feedback conferences. Feedback, again, is something that had a positive relationship with employee well-being and employee commitment to the organization in the literature. Increasing feedback seems to help employees more clearly understand the goals of their unit. So the next one is to implement a 360-degree evaluation process for managers and executives. If you're not aware, the 360-degree evaluation process is one in which managers are evaluated by not only their seniors, but also their peers and their direct reports. So in this sense, employees at least will feel like if they have grievances with management or executives, then their voice is going to be heard, because their voice is going to be incorporated into the evaluation process for their managers and executives. Finally, we have recommendation 3 here is to enact a comprehensive training development program. And really the purpose of this is to let the employees know that the company is willing to invest in them as not only employees and professionals, but as people. The first one here is to implement a tuition assistance program for all employees. This allows employees a little bit of choice in their educational endeavors, but also ensures that we get some sort of continuing education out of our employees. The second one here is to provide competitive opportunities for professional leadership and technical development training and to high-performing employees. So what I mean by this is perhaps setting aside a half a dozen training slots for advanced leadership courses or advanced technical courses that the company pays for and helps to develop on the job and even more broad skills like leadership for our employees. And finally, I recommend that we encourage work units to formalize internal training procedures. Now, this isn't us trying to force a universal training procedure on each unit, but rather having the units understand that we recognize their expertise and asking them to put that expertise down on paper in terms of a training document or a training program for their employees to ensure employees get the development they need and to let employees know that even at the unit level, this company is invested in improving their knowledge and advancing their career. So the reason I chose an evidence-based research piece is because evidence-based research draws from across the literature. When somebody does an evidence-based research project, they're drawing literature from across different disciplines. They're synthesizing information from multiple research methods so that we're not looking at just quantitative reporting or just qualitative reporting, but all sorts of data from all sorts of studies. And we're also focusing on real issues. Rather than looking at theory, we're looking at scholarship that tries to apply theory to the real world and reports back that theory's success or failure, so we can actually see what does work. By pulling from existing research, we can get a large amount of data on a single issue and build what one might consider a consensus understanding of the particular problem we're looking at. Another thing that's really good about evidence-based research and approaching management problems is that these research pieces typically involve a certain level of academic rigor, transparency, and academic quality that you might not find in other types of management resources. These types of studies typically share what methods they use to gather their information and how they determine the quality of their sources. So stakeholders like you and me can be fully informed about how the data was collected, how the data was interpreted. And studies that employ rigor and transparency and choose quality research to evaluate make it difficult to discount real evidence. So we're pulling from reputable resources, and when they say something, particularly if a whole group of scholars find the same thing or a whole group of scholar practitioners find the same thing in their research, it's hard for me to say, well, this isn't true, or this is wrong. Or if they find that two things aren't related, again, it's hard for us to say, well, I heard, so-and-so told me this or that, so that's what I'm going to use. It's hard for us to say that something's going to work when the evidence shows us that it hasn't worked in the past. So that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can definitely shoot me an email at steven.stottlemyre@gmail.com. I will be happy to send this presentation out to everyone. Here are some references that were used throughout this presentation, the primary reference being number 5 down there at the bottom. Thank you.